So I want to talk to you about Independence Day. The nation of the United States of America have actually two Independence Days. The first, July the 4th, 1776, which was observed yesterday. And the second, we really don't talk about. And that is actually December the 6th, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was signed, freeing the American slaves on paper. And the reason I say on paper, I'll talk about in just a moment, but when it comes to Independence Day, I want to share a couple of scriptures with you if we want to observe Independence Day in the true sense of the word. Some scriptures that come to mind. But first of all, when I think about Independence Day in the United States of America, you have to take into account when it took place in 1776, right? Which the American slave, we are the descendants, black people are the descendants of slavery. And that Independence Day did nothing for the American slave. In fact, the signing of the 13th Amendment, which freed slaves on paper, and the reason I say on paper, because immediately after the 13th Amendment was signed, the nation, home of the brave, land of the free, came up with vagrancy laws. And vagrancy laws said that if you didn't have a job, you could be arrested. If you were standing on the corner, you could be arrested. If you gathered in a group, you could be arrested. So here you were, as a slave, freely recently given your so-called freedom. Of course, you didn't have a job. You didn't leave the plant. When you left the plantation, you didn't have a job, and so you could be arrested, and then the authorities would lease you out, in many cases, to the former owner to work for free, pretty much re-enslaving you. So that's why I say the signing of the 13th Amendment at that time, even though on paper slaves were free, but the South passed laws to pretty much keep slavery intact. And so myself, I don't observe Independence Day because in 1776, my people were still in bondage. And I don't know if you know much about slavery, but slavery, American slavery, was one of the most brutal institutions the world had ever known. I think the only one that may have been worse was Haitian slavery by the French. They were brutal also. In fact, they would bury people in the ground up to their head, and as for entertainment, they would invite other plantations over and just whack their heads with a stick, right? Now, American slavery was no less brutal. Some plantation owners would even whip the skin off of their slaves if they didn't pick enough cotton. I remember once that I wrote a term paper, a college term paper, and the subject of the paper given to me by the professor was religion among the founding fathers. Right, and I wrote in that term paper, which the professor told me to rewrite the paper because of what I said, but I documented it with his textbooks. I wrote in that paper the founding fathers, those signers of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, one of them being Thomas Jefferson. Well, first of all, I mentioned George Washington. I said George Washington was a murderer. And of course, that professor at Liberty University was furious. But I documented it with the textbook from Liberty University. And what I said was, right, following Independence Day in 1776, when this new nation was established, they wanted to expand. So they decided to try to acquire the Northwest Territory. And it was a confederation of Native American tribes that lived in the Northwest Territory. And George Washington said, offer to buy it from them. And they said, no, this is our home. We don't want to sell it. We don't want to sell our home. So George Washington sent in a military force into the Northwest Territory. And that confederation of Indian tribes, they defeated the first military expedition or attacking force, not expedition, into their homeland. So George Washington got the most notorious, cruel general that was under his command during the War for Independence. His name was Anthony Wayne. His nickname was Mad Anthony Wayne. And Mad Anthony Wayne had a reputation of being extremely violent. George Washington said, I want you to go in the Northwest Territory and do whatever you got to do to get that territory. So Mad Anthony Wayne, he went in and he poisoned rivers, he burned crops, he killed wildlife, deers, rabbits, squirrels, anything that moved that people could eat. He burned or killed, and only when the people were starving, these confederation of Indian tribes were starving, Mad Anthony Wayne went in with, under orders from George Washington, went into the Northwest Territory. They killed women, they killed men, old men, young men, babies, girls, grandmothers, grandfathers, killed everybody that they could. And then the United States of America acquired the Northwest Territory from this confederation of Indian tribes. Well, George Washington gave the order, so that made him a murderer, right? And I said that in the term paper, and the professor said, you need to rewrite that paper, but I stood by what I said, and I documented it from their textbook. And then I said, Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, and I believe one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, that document that we use for the observation of Independence Day, I say Thomas Jefferson was a rapist and most likely a pedophile. And the reason I said that, because if you had children from your slave, they didn't willingly give themselves to Thomas Jefferson. You, being their owner, forced yourself upon them, which made it rape. And it has been said that Thomas Jefferson liked the younger version of girls, which makes him questionable as far as their age, but also for his character, claiming to be a Christian, but also one of the founding fathers and the signing of the founding fathers for so-called United States of America, and the sign of the Declaration of Independence, which is the day that we celebrated yesterday. I was reading a document produced by, or reading a document from the address that Frederick Douglass gave in regards to Independence Day. And this address was in, I'm going to read you an excerpt, and this address was in 1852. And he was given this. He had escaped from slavery, and Frederick Douglass became a great orator. I want to read you an excerpt from his narrative on Independence Day. He says, and I'm just going to read you a small portion of it. He said, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked darker to me than on this 4th of July, whether we turn to the declarations of the past or the professions of the present. The conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Now, he wrote this or gave this speech in 1852, but it sure seems relevant to today. Right? Here was Frederick Douglass saying in 1852, and it's a timeless comment because it seems applicable today when you look at the conduct of our nation as far as Independence Day and as far as international relations. The nation, the home of the brave and the land of the free, had become the tyrannous, right? They have become tyrannical like the British Empire that we say that Independence Day represents freedom from the tyranny of the British Empire. Well, we have become that tyrant in our frivolous wars, in our way that we treat people of other nations and ethnicities, right? America has not changed very much. In fact, we are going backwards. If you look at the present day of things, we are actually going backwards instead of forward. Right? In fact, right, they don't even want us to teach what I just told you about in school. They don't want us to discuss slavery. It's okay to discuss George Washington, but we certainly can't discuss slavery just because it makes certain population uncomfortable. For example, I mentioned how if slaves didn't pick enough cotton, a slave master had a right to take his bull whip and whip the skin off of them and whip them almost close to death, right? With no repercussions, right? And so Independence Day, right, I don't think holds true to people of Native American ancestry and Black Americans. It doesn't hold true because the nation still conducts itself pretty much in a racist manner. Did you see in the media yesterday where white supremacists on Independence Day marched through Washington, D.C., right? Wearing their masks, by the way, because I guess don't want everybody to know that they are who they are. But if you believe in what you believe, why are you wearing a mask? And so, but when I see 300 and 400 men walking through the Capitol, right, proudly proclaiming their racial superiority and white supremacy, carrying the rebel flags, right, it really makes Independence Day a farce, right? And so I just wanted to share a scripture with you. If God was to speak on Independence Day, this is what he would say. Let me read you a scripture from 2 Chronicles 7:14. This is what God would say. In fact, if you get out a dollar bill, on that dollar bill is inscripted, "In God we trust." So if the nation says, "In God we trust," on Independence Day, we have to do an examination. Is the nation behaving in a godly manner? And I would say no. According to its relations internationally and internally, the nation has not functioned in a godly manner. So Independence Day doesn't, now, don't get me wrong, I'm proud to be an American citizen because this country was built on the labor of, and matter of fact, America became economically empowered from the slave labor of our ancestors. So that's how America became a powerful nation, right? Through the economic empowerment of slave labor who absolutely got nothing out of it. Now, let me read you the scripture in 2 Chronicles 7:14. If this nation really wants to value Independence Day, right? And so you ask your question, well, how do we navigate valuing the United States and remain honest, right, about Independence Day? Well, let me read you the scripture in 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. Well, first of all, right, when it says, if my people who are called by my name, well, we printed it on the money, and God we trust. And so are we saying that we are God's people? If the nation says we are God's people and print on its currency, it's currency for trade and purchase, and God we trust, then we are obligated to function and legislate and govern in a godly manner. I don't see that happening. With the leaders we have today, I see nothing godly about it, right? So this says will humble themselves and pray. Before a nation can humble themselves, they have to take an honest look. Who are we? How do we function? How do we treat others? Do we treat everybody with dignity? Do we treat everybody with respect? Or only people who look like us? And then it goes on to say in 2 Chronicles 7:14, say, will humble themselves. If my people are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. So you have to ask yourself the question, does our nation have wicked ways? Right? It's just about every week you hear about a black male being killed by our so-called law officers. And don't get me wrong, I would say the majority of our police officers are honest and good people. But it's a bad element there that seems to be no repercussions for them when they shoot and kill repetitively. That's a whole nother subject, how many of us have died at the hands of police officers for something as simple as a traffic stop. And so this says, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. Then I will heal from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. I submit to you, the land needs healing because our nation is functioning in a wicked way in the things that we are doing. Just recent war we have. One of the first things that happened in the war was a school was bombed full of school girls. I would say that that's wicked. A war for Israel, pretty much, right? Pretty much, I think Israel is the capital of the United States of America because they seem to be calling the shots, or when we go to war and when we don't. Then another scripture I want to share with you comes from Luke 4:18, and this is what Jesus himself probably would say if he looked at the nation of the United States of America, and if he said, if you want to honor Independence Day, right, you have to function in this manner, right? He would say, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. And so if we still have elements of our society that are oppressed, then I would say we have not reached the point when we can say we can observe Independence Day in truth, because the nation still is ill and have a need for healing. So I just wanted to share some thoughts about Independence Day. Now, don't get me wrong, America certainly has potential to be the greatest nation on earth, but it must function in a godly manner. It must treat all of its citizens with dignity, with respect, devoid of racism, and then I will proudly honor Independence Day. When I see Independence Day represents all of its people, then I can say United States of America on Independence Day means freedom and justice for all, right? And can we honestly say freedom and justice for all in our justice system as we observe Independence Day? Until that day arrives, right, Independence Day is not what it should be. And once again, let me just say this real quickly, right? When the 13th Amendment was signed, I would like to see that as a national holiday, because the 13th Amendment, even though it didn't do what it should have done, that was the legislation that said the slaves in America were free, December 6, 1865. It wasn't Juneteenth. Now, I'm not discrediting or minimizing the importance of Juneteenth, but Juneteenth only represents what happened in Texas. So they made that a holiday as almost as they was throwing us a bone. Say they don't know their history. Let's just give them a bone and not give them the holiday that should be the holiday, December the 6th, 1865, with the signing of the 13th Amendment. So they say, well, let's give them Juneteenth, right? And right, that's only about the slaves in Texas didn't know that the Civil War freed them. And so that's only about Texas. We got 50 states. Right? We got 50 states in the United States of America. So if we want a holiday, right, commemorating the freedom of Black Americans, it should be the 13th Amendment, even though that has shortcomings, but not Juneteenth, which only recognizes Texas. Now, I honor Juneteenth, right? But it is deficient. It is deficient as far as observing a holiday for the freedom of African Americans. Right? And so it should be 2 Independence Days, right? Because 1776, right, did not free my ancestors. They were still in bondage. There was no independence. There was no freedom, right? If Independence Day represents freedom from tyranny of the British Empire, well, my ancestors were still under tyrannical behaviors and violent behavior of plantation owners towards their slaves, right? It was a brutal, children being sold from their parents, right? Let me give you, and I'm gonna let you, I'm gonna end with this. I'm gonna give you a picture of a slave ship and how we got here, right? And lost our independence, this transatlantic slave trade. Let me give you a picture of this transatlantic slave trade. So it's a wooden ship, several decks on that wooden ship. And on this wooden ship, they have two ways of packing slaves in. They had loose pack and tight pack. In loose pack, they would pack the slaves in the bottom of the ship side by side, shoulder to shoulder. In tight pack, they would lay the slave on the side because they could get more in. And they say more would survive the transatlantic voyage, which took 3 or 4 months if the wind was good. And so now I want you to picture yourself on this slave ship, right? Defecating for 3 months in the bottom of the ship, defecating, urinating, vomiting, right? And rats would come up and chew at the vomitus of these African slaves, our ancestors, on the bottom of the ship. And because their hands were chained, many times they couldn't even swat away the rat. Now, the person in front of you is defecating on you because he probably has diarrhea because he's on the bottom of the ship and he's eating things he's not used to. He's urinating on the man in front of him, and he's defecating on the man behind him. Can you imagine hundreds of human beings in the holds of ships, on the several decks of this ship, right? All defecating, all urinating, right there where they lay. Can you imagine? Even the odor alone they said that before a slave ship could be seen on the horizon, it could be smelled that the wind was blowing towards the shore, because you got 300 or 400 individuals below the decks of this ship, all defecating and urinating. And and think about it. They were not laying on something soft. They were laying on rough wooden planks, chained together, no ventilation, right? Because they would close the hatch of the ship once they came in and gave them whatever food they were going to feed them. Right? Then they go back up and close the whole of the ship with all that feces and urine, with no ventilation, no windows, the hatches closed, it's suffocating heat, right? And every now and then they would take a small group of slaves up on the deck. Now, when you left Africa, if you were already of small stature, probably, now you have sores where the ship has been rolling and rocking in that rough seas at the time. And they would take the small groups of slaves up on the ship, and they would take cold, salty seawater and throw it on, and then take bristle brushes and brush them down. Now, if you got open wounds on your back where you're laying on this wood, can you imagine being brushed down with cold, salty seawater with open wounds with a hard bristle brush? And medical treatment was, if you had bones showing through, they would cover that bone with hot tar. Can you imagine what inhumane actions and behaviors from the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence, right? What inhumane, what human can treat another human being that way, and then when you enslave them, not even consider them a complete human being? Right? I wrote another term paper where I said that the slave master treated his horse better than the slave. If the horse ran away, when the slave master got the horse back, he would he'd get the slave to brush the horse down and feed him some oats. If the slave ran away, he sent the dogs after the slave and slave catchers. And when they caught the slave, he didn't get oats and pat it down because he was glad to be back. He got strung up, tied to a tree, beat into his flesh, hung off of his body, right? And so pretty much the slave master treated his horse better than he treated a human being. And when I wrote that term paper, that professor tried to get me to rewrite it too, because he was infuriated because I said that. But I didn't rewrite it. I just took the lower grade because what I said was true. And so I just say that to say, right, this is the history now that they don't want to teach in schools and never have taught in school, the truths of the slave trade. In fact, in the history that we are taught as if our history started with slavery, which it didn't. That's a whole nother subject. But we can't even teach that honestly in American schools because it makes people uncomfortable, right? All right. Well, it makes me uncomfortable to teach when you want to teach me about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who owned slaves. But anyway, Independence Day has potential when the nation treats all of its people with equal respect, equal dignity, and justice for all. Equal justice. Have a good day.